Good afternoon, and welcome to the Institute for Global Engagement's Faith and International Affairs conference call series. My name is Kristen Lundquist, Program Director for the Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership, and I will serve as the moderator on today's call. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Jennifer Bryson, Director of Operations and Development at the Center for Islam and Religious Freedom in Washington, D.C., where she studies and works in partnership with Muslims supporting religious freedom. Dr. Bryson has a BA from Stanford University in Political Science, an MA from Yale University in History, and a PhD from Yale in Arabic and Islamic Studies from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. From late 2001 to 2008, she worked for the U.S. Department of Defense. Her assignments included strategic outreach to media and civil society institutions in Egypt and Yemen. From 2009 to 2014, she was director of the Islam and Civil Society Project at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. She has been teaching part-time at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania since 2010. In 2012 and 2013, she was a visiting professor at the U.S. Army War College, and she continues to teach part-time now as a visiting professor. Dr. Bryson's topic for our call today is developments in Muslim support for religious freedom. Thanks so much, Dr. Bryson, for joining us today. Before I turn the mic over to Dr. Bryson, a few quick words on the call format and protocol. We'll begin with about 20 minutes of remarks from Dr. Bryson, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. If you would like to ask a question, please press 5* at any point during the call, and you will be placed in the queue. Please also note that this call is on the record. An audio recording will be made available on the IGE website. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again, Dr. Bryson. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kristen, and I'd like to thank the Institute for Global Engagement for offering this opportunity. First today, I'd like to introduce my approach to this topic of Muslim support for religious freedom. I am myself a Christian, and with my work with Muslim support for religious freedom, I am both an observer of this through my research I began in 2009, and also I work together as a partner with Muslims who support religious freedom, especially in my work at the Center for Islam and Religious Freedom, known also by the acronym CIRF or SURF. So if you hear me talking today about surf and surfing, I'm not leaving to go to the beach. It's CIRF. You can find the media that I'm going to discuss today at the SURF website, and that is islamandrf.org. That's Islam and the RF is in religious freedom. And at the SURF website, click on English at the top of the screen, and then on the English page, click on bibliography. So first, I'd like to clarify that there are, broadly speaking, two ways that one could assess Muslim support for religious freedom. One way would be through social science studies to measure the extent of support, such as in-depth polling and focus groups. And this would be a quantitative approach. The other way, which is the avenue of my own studies, is to examine the religious intellectual discussions among Muslims themselves. My own question when I'm engaged in this research is, what do Muslims have to say about their own religion? This latter qualitative approach is what I'm going to discuss today. But as for quantitative studies, there's great value in these, and there is great need for more extensive work in this area. Organizations like Pew and Gallup have done some work, but there's need for more. And the Center for Islam and Religious Freedom, for example, has lined up researchers to do quantitative studies of Muslim attitudes to religious freedom and religious freedom-related issues in Bangladesh, northern Nigeria, and the U.S. Currently, we do not have funding to pursue these, but we think such projects are worthwhile and they're on our wish list. You'll notice that I have not mentioned government policies of Muslim-majority countries as a measure of Muslim support or not for religious freedom. While I think these government policies are relevant, I think that it's a mistake to conflate the religion of Islam itself with the policies of governments in countries where there happen to be large Muslim populations. For one thing, many of these governments are authoritarian and not representative, and these are modern nation states. Second, trying to measure Muslim support for religious freedom this way entirely omits the many millions and millions of Muslims who live as minorities, whether in India, South Africa, the U.S., or beyond. Now, on to an overview of 4 areas in which I see developments in Muslim support for religious freedom. Think of these as areas in which conversations are underway. And that's the important thing for today, is what I'm going to talk about is these topics are being discussed and the conversations are happening, even if we don't always see them appearing in mainstream media. These 4 topics I'm going to address today are apostasy, blasphemy, citizenship, and honesty. My research has focused mostly on Sunni Islam, so this will be the focus of my remarks. So I will be including some examples from Shia Islam too. Speaking in very broad terms, where I see the most substantive, serious conversations on these topics is in mainstream, traditionally oriented Sunni Islam. That is to say, those trained in and respecting the 4 traditional schools of law. Importantly, the way I see these Muslims describing their own engagement with these religious freedom topics is they speak of their work in terms of renewal and revival and not reform. Now, this is a realm, the realm where I find really the richest discussions and the discussions that I think are most likely to have the deepest, most far-reaching impact, both geographically and over time. Now, there are also some Muslims who we might call modernist Muslims who are addressing these topics very seriously, and they tend to identify themselves as reformers. There's a lot of important work going on there, important contributions, but I think that their impact is going to be restricted to a narrower realm within the very broad, diverse world of Muslims. I'll also note that where I do not see conversations underway in any major way on topics central to religious freedom is among the many various strands associated with Salafi and Wahhabi interpretation. I know it's very broad, a very complicated topic, but just in a broad sweep, that's the overview I see. Now, as for apostasy, the important development happening here is an increasing number of Muslim voices who are making arguments from within Islam against the death penalty for apostasy. In terms of books on these topics, the 2 best works I can recommend, the first is called Apostasy in Islam, a Historical and Scriptural Analysis by Taha Jabr al-Alwani. He is an Egyptian scholar who passed away just recently. The International Institute of Islamic Thought has translated his book into English, and an executive summary of the book is available on the SURF website. And the original of the book is in Arabic. A second important contribution in opposition to death for apostasy is a book by Mohsen Kadivar. And SURF has commissioned an English translation of this book that was completed in 2016, and we're hoping to find a publisher and get it published by maybe the end of 2017, early 2018. And this book is a refutation of the punishment of death penalty for apostasy from the lens of Islamic jurisprudence. Also, SURF has received funding to translate that book from Persian into Arabic in 2018. In addition, scholar Abdullah Saeed has written on this topic. Plus, an important, what we might call real-world development in this regard is a statement earlier this year by the Council of Religious Scholars, the Ulama of Morocco, rejecting death for apostasy. Significantly, they frame their argument as a result and not a rejection of the traditions of Islam. They focus on how the rulings of death for apostasy were really about political treason and that the situation today is different. The second topic I'm going to address is blasphemy. The main development I see here is scholars encouraging peaceful responses to blasphemy. And this work is, and it's not just scholars, there's also other Muslim religious leaders and media figures doing this. And this is happening through highlighting examples from the lifetime of Muhammad, especially from the Hadith literature, fostering public awareness about how Muhammad himself responded peacefully when he was insulted, when his faith was insulted. A number of scholars, such as Muhammad Hashim Kamali and Abdullah Saeed, also argue for limiting government regulation of blasphemy and speech, but this issue of blasphemy remains a thorny one. Now, outside of scholarship, at a popular level, it's important to note that last week in Pakistan, after university student Mashal Khan was murdered due to an accusation of blasphemy, there was the most widespread and strongest condemnation of such a killing I have ever seen in Pakistani media, both in newspapers and in social media. And I make this observation based on my own following of English language Pakistani media and the observations of my Pakistani colleague at SURF who follows Urdu language media on these issues. This strong reaction against such repulsive, cruel violence reflects a trend I've noticed, anecdotally speaking, since the work that led up to SURF began, when we initiated social media engagement in 2015. So we've been doing this now 2015 to 2017. Again and again, we find that the most positive, enthusiastic responses by Muslims to the work of SURF are in the most violent areas. These include Pakistan, northern Nigeria, Somalia, and I think it's helpful to think for a moment about the origins of support for religious freedom among Christians with voices such as Roger Williams and Thomas Helwith. They made these arguments in a context of brutal persecution of minority Christian sects. So perhaps we'll see more and more bright lights of hope emerging, sadly enough, but from environments where there's a strong backlash against violence. And we hear from Muslims all the time saying this does not represent my faith and we reject this. The third topic I'll address is citizenship. By citizenship, I don't mean local civic engagement and voting, though these are good things. Rather, I refer to the concept of equality of all citizens before the law, in particular in Muslim-majority countries. Far and away, the most important development in this regard is the Marrakesh Declaration from January 2016. This was an international initiative led by high-level Sunni Muslim scholars calling on Muslims to develop a new jurisprudence of citizenship. And there was some involvement by Shia scholars, and there was an important follow-up meeting in Japan on this topic with Sunni and Shia scholars together. Now, whether the momentum of the Marrakesh Declaration will be able to continue remains to be seen. I think they're to be adopted and internalized at local levels all over the globe. This initiative needs to have a sustained, perhaps 5 to 10 year strategically savvy communication campaign and funding for local Islamic educational institutions and civil society organizations around this topic. We don't quite see this yet, but I'm willing to hold out hope. And it's important to see the Marrakesh Declaration as something that was intended to be a catalyst. It was not meant to be a capstone final statement on the issue of citizenship. Rather, it's trying to initiate a movement and highlight for Muslims a call by senior leaders saying this is a priority topic of engagement. The fourth and last topic I will address is honesty. Islam places a high value on honesty and strongly condemns hypocrisy. I'm starting to see Muslims connect these values with public policy discussions, challenging public policies which in effect encourage hypocrisy, outward behavior not reflecting the inner heart, and in effect punish honesty, for example, admitting unbelief when that's what a person has in their heart. Examples of this include attention Abdullah Saeed has given to the problem of hypocrisy, and then also significantly in the religious movement inside of Iran that is rejecting government involvement in religion and is rejecting religious involvement in government. And in this Iranian movement, the widespread hypocrisy that these religious scholars have seen since the 1979 revolution, which some of them supported, but they've since changed their minds. This presence of hypocrisy plays a really significant role in the types of arguments that these scholars are making for separating religion and government. There's a terrific book on this by Nasser Gobadzadeh called Religious Secularity, and I have a review of it in draft. My review is called The Roger Williamses of Iran, and I hope that that review is going to see the light of day in the next few weeks. So now I'm going to tell you what we might call my March Madness bracket for Islam and religious freedom, where I would place my bets. Of the four topics I've addressed, apostasy, blasphemy, citizenship, and honesty, the one on which I think we'll see the most progress toward religious freedom in the near future is rejection of the death penalty for apostasy. And the topic on which I'm most pessimistic, or which I think it's going to be the most difficult and long-term, is going to be continuing to work about this issue of blasphemy and how it is viewed and whether or not there's a role for government in it and popular responses. And with that, I am open to your questions.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. I'm sure our callers are eager to engage with you further on these issues. We're now going to open the lines for questions from our audience. As a reminder to audience members, if you would like to ask a question, please press 5*. When it is your turn to ask your question, today's call administrator, Megan Karner, will announce your name and unmute your line so that you may ask it. Lines will be placed back on mute immediately following the asking of a question. Also, please note that if you are in the queue and for any reason decide you no longer wish to ask your question, simply press 5* again, and your name will be erased from the queue. Finally, for the sake of other callers, I will ask that when you are called upon, please immediately ask your question rather than providing your own commentary. Megan, our first question, please.
Sure. Yes, we are going to begin with Reverend Margaret Rose with the Episcopal Church. Reverend, I'm going to unmute your line, and you may go ahead with your question.
Great, thank you. My question has to do with what Christians are able to do in following up on this. We were represented in the conversations with the Marrakesh document and in the follow-up meeting, which was in Atlanta. And now I wonder what's next for those of us who support following that up. What actions might we take?
It's a great question. Anything that helps to foster public awareness that the Marrakesh Declaration exists is valuable. I think also for any of you who have contact with some of the leadership involved in the Marrakesh Declaration, there's a very important role for senior religious leaders to play in this, certainly, but there needs to be more to push this down to a grassroots level. such as I mentioned, like a communication campaign. And also for those who are American, I think there's a really important role for American Muslims to play, and they have very valuable contributions to make, for example, in sharing their experience as religious believers of living in a country where there's equality before the law. So also encouraging Americans to be involved, and I think also, specifically to address the current climate that we face in the U.S., in which there's such intense hostility to Muslims, fostering awareness among non-Muslims about initiatives like the Marrakesh Declaration, I think it can help provide a more informed approach to Islam. Because one of the things I see very concretely among American Muslims, for example, on the issue of engagement with religious freedom, is American Muslims right now are distracted in ways that I understand. Their time, their organizational energy, their funding in local organizations is going into countering hostility to Muslims in their day-to-day lives in America. And so anything that can be done to reduce that hostility is both a right and just thing to do, and it also frees up Muslims to be able to engage in work other than having to defend themselves right now. And so for non-Muslims, there's important ways that we can be partners in that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. The next question is going to come from Mr. Randall Paul with the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. Mr. Paul, I'm going to
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. My question is, have you considered adding a fifth item to your list, that being persuasive proselytizing, or what I prefer at our foundation to call contestation of ideologies as part of any society that allows religious freedom? Certainly Roger Williams would be the patron saint of religious contestation for all. Mm-hmm. So that why was not included? Is it a bridge too far to even bring the subject up? Where do you go with that?
So the reason I did not bring it up is that it's not a topic that I see Muslims themselves discussing. And the four topics I addressed are the ones where, when I listen to Muslims and what they're saying, those are the four that emerge. But an area where I do see some discussion on this, I would say it falls as a subset of the ways that the blasphemy question is being addressed. And it gets at these broader issues of freedom to discuss one's own faith. And this includes freedom for Muslims in Muslim majority countries to have free and open discussion about their faith. And within that is what you call persuasive proselytizing. And related to that is a way that I think that we can help share examples around the world of ways that the legal structure in which there's government more or less neutrality. As I say, not every country is going to have the exact same model. Ways that then a response to that, and we see this in research, for example, by Dan Philpott, Timothy Shaw, and Monica Duffy Toft in their terrific book, God's Century, that religious believers respond by putting their energies into more peaceful activities when the government chooses to be neutral. And also that when there are disagreements, when somebody does say something that one doesn't like, that the way to respond is to have a better argument and be more persuasive. So that topic does come up from time to time, but it's not a major focus right now.
Thank you very much. Is any conversation, if I can follow up, of da'wah itself in a more broad sense, is that the idea that they have a responsibility to change the world by spreading the word, that's not part of the current conversation going on then?
Well, it is, but not as significantly as these topics like opposing death for apostasy. But an interesting way in which da'wah is coming up in a religious freedom framework is Muslims who are experiencing the way religious freedom is friendly to da'wah, to evangelization, for example, in the United States. And then when this gets around then to the question, and I had this conversation with a Moroccan, for example, who was very active and eager in wanting to share his message, his love of Islam with non-Muslims in America. And I said to him, well, so you're experiencing that, freedom allows you to do that. And, what about the freedom of believers who are not Muslim to discuss their faith in Morocco? So the way the question is coming up is in societies where it's allowed, and then sort of the feedback question of, perhaps this is something that could be a two-way street. It's there off and on, but it's not a major focus.
Thanks a lot. That was a great answer.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Our next question comes from Sahar Chaudhry with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I am going to unmute your line, and you may go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, Jennifer. This is Sahar. I have a question. I was hoping you could address the question of the Ahmadiyya community in Pakistan, where religious freedom and the ideas of religious theology seem to butt up against one another, given that Ahmadiyyas and even the vast majority of Sunni Muslims would not view Ahmadiyyas as Muslims. And now you're seeing laws within Pakistan that are enforcing that particular religious view that the community is not Muslim. If you could just address that, that'd be great.
I mean, this is something that has come up, as you might imagine, in my work in quite a few different contexts, plus just the reality of how brutal the persecution is of the Ahmadiyya in Pakistan and elsewhere. And the most hope I've seen for progress on reducing the persecution is when the theological question of who is a Muslim is discussed as an intra-faith, or in the view of some, interfaith, but as a theological question that is where there are different viewpoints and that's open to discussion. When that is separated from the legal question of allowing equal citizenship before the law, and that includes with agreement to disagree about definitions of who qualifies as what. And I think that progress on this topic is slowed down when those two are conflated, as I see happen sometimes when there are religious freedom forums. And I think historical lessons on this, I think it would be very helpful to do more to highlight, for example, the historical lessons of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church in the U.S., that experienced brutal persecution. The way that was resolved was not by getting Protestant and Catholic Christians to agree that Mormons are Christians, but rather by what my colleague Asma Udin calls triumph of the Constitution, of celebrating the legal structure in which the government allows everybody equal citizenship before the law. And then in that peaceful context, in private discussions, there can be ongoing dialogue between religious groups. But, I will say that I do not see a lot of attention to this question happening among broad mainstream Sunni Muslims. There is some to be certain. For example, at a major event that the Muslim Peace Forum had in the UAE, they did invite some Ahmadi guests. And also the Pakistani Sunni Muslim group, Engage Pakistan, is doing some really great work to support ideas and the concept of equal citizenship before the law, and that includes providing religious arguments in favor of that.
Thank you, Jennifer, very, very much. Very helpful and very insightful things for me to think about. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Ginny Ferris with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Ms. Ferris, I'm going to unmute your line, and you may go ahead with your question.
Thank you for your presentation, Jennifer. My question is concerning the blasphemy laws. We were in touch recently with a Pakistani bishop who thought that calling for repeal of the blasphemy laws, in essence, was a non-starter, but suggested that focus on how to stop misuse of blasphemy might be a better way to go. What's your take on how that would be received? I recognize that you indicate that blasphemy may be the hardest of your four areas to focus on, but I'd welcome your view on whether there's any likelihood of using this avenue of misuse of blasphemy as a way to proceed forward. Thank you.
I think it's very sound advice. I hear the same thing from Pakistanis. Now, but some of them are very passionate in insisting that maintaining the issue of eventual repeal of the law, they want to be upfront and open about that. But that the path to get there and also the path to reduce the mob violence and abuse of the blasphemy law, simply for personal vendettas, is going to come more. What I'm seeing happen is not discussion so much of preventing misuse of the law, because that still is very much an affirmation of having the law, and preventing abuse can be a little, it's unclear what that would look like. What I have found very interesting is where I mentioned I see Muslims really focusing on studying, communicating, and sharing the examples from the life of Muhammad. And that is in this realm of fostering peaceful responses to blasphemy. So I think communities working together on peaceful responses to blasphemy could be very fruitful. And there's room there for individual faiths to be working on this. It's a topic that lends itself to interfaith engagement. And as I said, it's a topic where I see Muslims themselves putting energy and trying to highlight those stories and attention to that. On the YouTube channel for Surf, there's a terrific video of a Saudi talking about this, and Surf has made the video available with both English and Bahasa Indonesian subtitles.
If I could just follow up very briefly, and sort of relates to using examples from Muhammad's life in terms of trying to promote more tolerance. And going back to your comments about the Marrakesh Declaration, I think at the scholarly level, which you've indicated there's increasing support, but how can the grassroots clerics, who are often the fomenters of a more virulent reaction to charges, how does the Muslim religious community overall trying to get the word down to the grassroots imam level?
So I'm going to take just one country as an example because how to go about this may vary, in a lot of places, and that's Pakistan. And I think the most important thing here is to recognize and provide space for, and when possible, support for, and this includes financing. We need to consider the donor community as a community we need to be communicating with. And this is Muslims who are part of the Sunni Muslim majority, who are concerned about these issues and who are working on these issues within the majority community. I've mentioned Engage Pakistan, and their website is engagepakistan.org. Also, it's been fascinating for me this year at the Center for Islam and Religious Freedom. CIRF is a host organization for a program called Atlas Corps, and we host fellows from the nonprofit sector in developing countries who come spend 1 year working at CIRF. And my Pakistani colleague right now, he had a blog post I recommend to you that was at the Georgetown Berkeley Center's website, the Cornerstone blog, about the need for majority involvement in Pakistan, because he's been involved in interfaith work for years in Pakistan and has a good view of the landscape. But he said that the landscape of those who are specifically engaged on issues of religious freedom and countering blasphemy are minority groups that are very much focused on minority rights. And while he recognizes that those are hugely important, there needs to be partnerships and, as I said, allowing space for facilitating, supporting these emerging pockets that we are seeing in the majority community, where they are addressing this from the perspective of being the majority and what does it mean to be Muslim and what does it mean to have good relations with our neighbors.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Our next question comes from caller. I didn't quite catch your name, but I'm going to unmute your line, and you may go ahead with your question.
Hello, is this for me?
Yes, yes, it is, sir. Go ahead with your question.
Carl Goldberg is my name. My question is the following. Could you, Jennifer, please address the great fundamental importance of making a clear distinction between Islam and Muslims, whereby Islam is the belief system based on the Quran and the Sunnah, whereas Muslims are people who identify with the faith but who do not necessarily follow it the way it's supposed to be followed according to the Islamic texts. And when you examine what Muslims are discussing, like religious freedom, apostasy, blasphemy, etc., do those Muslims ever discuss how they plan to overcome the sacred commands of their God and their Prophet to make war on non-Muslims until Islam rules the world? And wouldn't there always be a conflict between the Islamic religious establishment and any Muslims who propose reformist notions that you have been talking about? Thank you for your answer.
So there's several topics within there. One is that some of these initiatives, the attention to these topics that I'm seeing are coming from major leaders in what we might call the Sunni Muslim leadership establishment. For example, the Marrakesh Declaration was initiated from leadership. Also, when these Muslims are writing about their own faith, how they understand the religion of Islam and the obligations of Muslims to respond in faith to this, they are not. They don't see this. They don't see a call to. I'm going to paraphrase here. I can't remember exactly. Your wording on. Long-term war and conflict and tolerance control, and some specific examples of this are, for example, I frequently hear Muslims harking back to the earliest years of Islam, even during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, when there was persecution of the new believers on the Arabian Peninsula, and some followers left to go to Abyssinia, what's now Ethiopia, where they lived in exile away from the persecution. When there was then greater peace relatively on the Arabian Peninsula, and the new budding Muslim community told them, okay, things are okay here now, you can come back, the new Muslim community in Ethiopia, that was a very small minority living under a Christian king, said, well, we're actually quite happy here. And they were told, well, if you're in a place where you're free to practice your faith, then it's fine to stay. Also, if we look at Muslims in China starting by the early 700s, and they've been in China since the early 700s, and we have hundreds and hundreds of years of Muslims who have lived as minorities, sometimes as very small minorities, who have felt that there was no incompatibility between living as a minority and being able to be fully Muslim. This modern political Islamist narrative that to be Muslim you need to have political control is something that is the Muslim scholars I follow write as an aberration, and the historical example shows abilities to follow their faith in actually quite a variety of different types of settings.
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. Kristen, you had a question from?
Yes, I had two questions. So I'll put them both together and see if you can loop them together maybe. My first question for you, Jennifer, was for those who are new to the Marrakesh Declaration, where can people kind of go to learn more about the Declaration, kind of a Marrakesh Declaration 101? Is that something that SURF has on their website, or are there other resources that you could suggest? And then my second question is, how do you see gender equality and the full inclusion of women of faith factoring into these discussions? And then what can civil society do to more greatly support the inclusion of Muslim women in discussions and advocacy around religious freedom?
So on the Marrakesh Declaration, I'm going to confess here to an ongoing frustration of mine that it's now the end of April 2017. Marrakesh Declaration was in January 2016. The declaration itself is not available online. I hope that the organizers will choose to invest resources, high-level meetings, I guess, need to continue to happen, but resources really need to go down into a nuts and bolts staff level of having staff make the declaration available online. I have, some is that copy of it, so to say. And I'm told and have been told for a while that it's going to be online soon. The one thing all of us can do if you have contact with any of the organizers is keep asking, where is the declaration? Now, an executive summary of the declaration is available, and I'm going to recommend two resources. One is MarrakeshDeclaration.org, has the executive summary, and that is a good resource. Also, the U.S. Institute for Peace, USIP.org, produced a really nice little guide introducing the Marrakesh Declaration. Now, a little note of caution is there is a mistake in the USIP document. They have the executive summary of the Marrakesh Declaration in the document, so you can also access it there. But the document says that that's the Marrakesh Declaration, whereas what's in the USIP document is the executive summary. In addition, just an hour and a half ago, SURF had a fantastic meeting with a partner, and we are preparing with a partner and then in collaboration with international Muslim scholars to develop a training manual for the Marrakesh Declaration. And so we're trying to get funding to develop this training manual over the next few months to provide sort of a toolkit of resources that can be used. And one of the ideas that we have for this is to have a training manual for the Marrakesh Declaration and then have independent appendices to help facilitate also interfaith engagement. So, for example, an appendix of Christian-Muslim engagement, an appendix of Hindu-Muslim engagement. I would like to also see an appendix addressing issues of those who have no belief. So that's a project that we have, I think, a great team with great capacity lined up for, and we are now just looking for funding for that. Next, to your question of the involvement of women, this is a very serious issue because I am continually seeing forums of religious freedom engagement that are male only. And I think there's just a tremendous loss of capacity of 50% of the population. And it's this tendency to invite religious clerics, who in many traditions are just men. And I think one of the best things that we can do is to broaden our language and our thinking to religious leaders and religious actors. Because leadership within these communities comes in many forms. Religious actors play many different types of roles. And so I'm hopeful in the future that there will be more conscious inclusion of the many different members of these religious communities who would like to contribute. Oh, and one more note, since I see we have just a few more minutes. I want to mention that one of the challenges in this realm of Muslim support for religious freedom, and this is a topic that's one to that first question that I really appreciated on what are appropriate roles for non-Muslims. There's often a lot of confusion about what religious freedom is. If I had millions and millions of dollars, I really would like to fund a bunch of studies in Muslim populations around the world to try to figure out, when people hear the phrase religious freedom, what do they think that is? And so a useful resource on this topic that I recommend is that the Stephanus Alliance, which is an organization in Norway, has produced a very well done booklet trying to explain what religious freedom is. And the booklet's basis is Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And SURF has worked with the Stephanus Alliance. The Stephanus Alliance has translated the booklet into Urdu, and then SURF, we have that on our website, and we help to foster awareness of that. And then with Stephanus Alliance's permission, SURF got their booklet translated into Arabic. And so the Stephanus Alliance Guide to Religious Freedom as an international legal norm is available in Arabic, English, and Urdu at the SURF website. That's an area where I'd like to see a lot more work, and I think it would be very, very fruitful, is to have more educational resources available to popular, broad audiences, just trying to explain the basic concept of what religious freedom is.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I wanted to double check with Mr. Paul. I saw your hand up again. Just wanted to double check. Wasn't sure if you had one more question. Feel free to go ahead if you do.
I do, with regard to citizenship. Jennifer, is there any deep discussion of the difference between citizens, people of the book, versus polytheists versus atheists, and within people of the book, the sincere and non-hypocritical ones, and the insincere and hypocritical ones? In other words, when when you observe questions of citizenship, how do these aspects of doctrine and religiosity play out?
So this is an important question, and one that I realized I was skipping in the talk on citizenship in the interest of time, so I'm glad it came up. A question that's been raised about the Marrakesh Declaration is that the Marrakesh Declaration speaks of equal citizenship for the law for all religious believers. And and then the question of who are the people of the book. There are some Muslims who define that very narrowly, Jews, Christians, and Sabians. There are other Muslims who understand that broadly and point out that, for example, when Muslims spread into India, there was often an understanding that these other religions that they encountered were sort of incorporated under this concept of people of the book. So the Marrakesh Declaration, one thing that's important is calling for, Islamic jurisprudence is a living process. So it's calling for attention and development in Islamic jurisprudence on the question of what is citizenship and defining it. However, the Marrakesh Declaration does not address those of no faith or pagan polytheists. And I think that the leaders who put the document out are aware that that question has kept coming up, and it's an area where there is room for further discussion. And one little closing note, just before I came to do this call, my colleagues in the office were talking about an execution in Saudi Arabia that is related to accusations of blasphemy, apostasy. And my colleague who handles Surf's Arabic language Twitter account observed that there was really active pushback on Twitter from Saudi accounts of Saudis saying this is wrong, we reject this. So I'll end on that note that the discussions are happening not only among scholars, but these discussions are happening within civil society, and there are voices who are rejecting, for example, these policies of death for apostasy and blasphemy.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. And in the interest of time, I will turn it back over to you, Kristen.
Well, it sounds like our time is up, so I want to warmly thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today, and thank you to all of our callers for joining us today as well. You can listen again and share the audio from this call and explore our full archive of past calls by visiting the media library at the IGE website, www.globalengage.org. Finally, if you like the conference call series and would like to help keep it going strong, please also visit the support page of the IGE website and consider making a tax-deductible donation. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.